Welcome back. Welcome back. Human communication. Here we are again. So let's jump right in. Unit 3. Unit 3. We're going to cover a lot. I'm not going to go over that slide because we're going to cover way more than that. So, communication is integrated into all parts of our lives. But it's not always straightforward. I think you're picking that up from previous lessons, right? The relationship between language and meaning is not a straightforward one. One reason is the limitlessness of modern language systems like English. English grabs from other languages, borrows phrases, borrows parts of phrases, so English is a difficult language to learn. Language is productive in the sense that there are an infinite number of utterances we can make by connecting existing words in new ways. Additional, there is no limit to language's vocabulary, as we come up with new words every day. Of course, words aren't the only thing we need to communicate, although verbal and nonverbal communication are closely related in terms on how we create meaning, construct meaning. Nonverbal communication is not productive and limitless. We will study nonverbal in depth later on in this class. One of my favorites, by the way, nonverbal. You'll recall that generating meaning was a central part of the definition of communication, which we learned earlier. We arrive at the meaning through interaction between our nervous and sensory systems and some stimulus outside of them, right? It is here, between communication models we discussed earlier, encoding and decoding, that meaning is generated as sensory information is interpreted. The indirect and sometimes complicated relationship between language and meaning can further confuse, right? It can lead to frustration, or, on the flip side, it could even create humor. Sometimes we might experience all three. When we stop to think about how there are 25 definitions available to tell us the meaning of the word meaning. Since language and symbols are the primary vehicle of our communication, it's important that we do not take components of our verbal communication for granted. Language is symbolic. We say language is a symbolic system in the sense that there's little or no connection between words or between sounds that people use and objects to which these sounds refer. Words are associated with objects, actions, ideas by social convention. We constructed that. Without the symbolic signs of language, we cannot talk about anything. Language is primarily made up of symbols, right? A symbol is something that stands for something else, or represents something else, right? Symbols can be communicated verbally. Remember the phrase hello. In writing, HELLO, right? Or non-verbally. Hello, 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 right? In any case, the symbols we use to stand in for something else, like a physical object or an idea. Bottle. Let's see if I can reach it. Bottle. Another different than the first bottle, right? So things can be confusing. A word can be so many things. Unlike hieroglyphs in ancient Egypt, which often did have a literal relationship between the written symbol and the object being referenced, symbols used in modern languages look nothing like the object or idea to which they refer. We don't make pictographs anymore. Symbols we use combine to form language systems or codes. Codes are generally culturally agreed upon generalizations, right? They're symbols. They're basically systems of symbols when we think about it. And they help us understand, organize, and generate meaning for anything in life. There's 6,000 language codes used in the world. We use the language code of English. And about 40% of those, 2,400, are only spoken and do not have a written version. When you think about the Vikings, they didn't have a written language. It was all oral. Everything, their stories, everything. They had some runes that meant some things, but most of it wasn't a written language, and they certainly didn't document things the way we do. The symbolic nature of communication is a quality unique to us. I mean, there's no other animal that can say that, or any other creature. Since words we use do not really directly correspond to any one thing in our reality, we can communicate in abstracts. This property of language is called displacement, and specifically refers to our ability to talk about events that are removed in space or time from a speaker and or situation. While animals communicate, it's a much simpler way, and they mostly react to stimuli. Further, animal communication is extremely limited, lacks the productive quality of a language as we understand a language to be. When we think about the whole idea of, when we think about Latin and calculus, the word calculate, they all have a correlation. Calculus in Latin is pebble. But what's the correlation? Well, pebbles were used long ago to calculate things before we created a verbal or written numbering system. As I noted in the first unit, a farmer may have kept in a box one pebble for each of his chickens, or pebble. He made drawings of things. And it was his way of counting, to calculate. The system allowed the farmer to keep track of his livestock. He would periodically verify that the pebble did indeed correspond to a live chicken. And if there were a discrepancy, he would know that either he lost a chicken was killed by wildlife, or perhaps was stolen. Eventually, symbols were developed in making accounting easier. Instead of keeping track of a box of pebbles, he could record a symbol that looked like 5 or the numeral 15 to stand in for 15 pebbles, right? So when we think about pebbles and creating meaning, the triangle of meaning is a model of communication that indicates the relationship between thought, symbol, and reverent / highlights the indirect relationship between a symbol and a reverent. When we think about reverence, that means the actual thing. As you see in the figure 3.1, which I'll show you on the next slide, the thought is the concept or idea a person references. A symbol is the word that represents the thought, and the reverent is the actual object or idea that the symbol refers to. We'll use this model a few times in this class because it's easier to create understanding. So let's take dog. When we take dog, the symbol is DOG, dog, right? Or a picture of a dog, right? A thought is, I want to get a dog, or I have 2 dogs. They are laying right below me, sleeping in a big old bed underneath the desk. And then speaking of that, it's closer to it. That's a thought. Then I could actually show you a dog, which if one of them was cooperate. Lola, come. Lola, up. Thank you. This is Lola. This is Lola. She is a Maltipoo, and she doesn't know what in the heck's going on because she was sleeping, and I just woke her up, right? This is the Reverend. It's an actual dog, right? She's a Maltipoo. All right, I'm going to put you down now. Okay. So when we think about it, dog can mean many things, right? It could be different types of dogs, different breeds of dogs. And then I had to throw in the joke. It smells like up dog. What's up, dog? And then you see, there's a dog in the sky. I really wanted to put in the what we do in shadows, but that one was pretty classic as well. If you haven't watched the show, you might want to check it out. Definitions and denotative language, all right? So definitions help us narrow the meaning of particular symbols or words. And it also helps us get to that referent, or referent, rather. They provide more words or more symbols. And then, again, we have to kind of find that definitive term. If a concept or idea is so abstract and the word used to define it is also abstract, then you'll never create meaning. Have you ever been caught in a verbal maze with someone talking about something about an unfamiliar word, only to find out the definition contains more unfamiliar words and you're basically no closer to understanding what in the world this is? It's frustrating, right? So definitions, I want you to think about definitions and denotative. Words have denotative and connotative meanings. Denotative means the definitions that are accepted by a language group, let's say English, or the dictionary definition of a word. For instance, the denotation. My gosh, I can't talk today. Again, still feeling under the weather and my throat's not cooperating. Of the word cowboy is a man who takes care of cattle. But then cowboy also can mean a reckless or independent person. That's a more abstract idea set, right? But it's still the same thing. Cowboy. Reckless, or somebody who rides a horse. If we take a really abstract word like change, well, change has multiple definitions in the dictionary. So change could mean what I have in my pocket, because I stopped at a store on my way to record this lesson and got some coins, right? That's change. All right. Or if someone didn't like a class, they could turn around and change what course they're taking. That means something completely different than coins in my pocket. Connotation refers to definitions that are based on emotion or experience-based associations. When we go back to the previous words, change can have positive or negative connotations depending on a person's experience. Meaning, do you like change? Has change been good in your life or bad in your life, right? And those feelings, those emotions, affect your ability to think of the word, see the word, and have a clear meaning. Remember, the words we choose can lead our audience to an understanding or create a lack of understanding. So ultimately, we've got to choose our words carefully to create the understanding. Again, remember that language is learned. Relationship between symbols that make up our language and their reference is arbitrary. They don't have meaning, in other words, until we assign meaning to them. That's just how language systems work. You learn over time the symbols which go with the reference, right? We can't just tell by looking at a symbol. For instance, on this page, I came up with apple, right? Apple. A-P-P-L-E, right? Apple. Now that could mean a picture of a fruit, right? Or it could mean an electronics product, like a cell phone, a tablet, or a computer. Over time, we associated the word apple to mean those things, right? We learned in school apple was a fruit. But then we learned over time apple meant a type of device. Same word, two different meanings. That would be connotative, right? All right, so the rules of language. Any language system has to have rules to make it learnable and usable. Grammar refers to the rules that govern how words are used to make phrases, which ultimately make sentences. Now, you would know what I mean if I said, where's the remote control? But think about if we jumble up the words. The control remote, where is? That's not really clear. It's very confusing, right? So we have to know the rules of grammar in order to be able to write and speak and be understood. And I included the rules of grammar right here. So if we start from the inside out, because I remember what I told you about me, I start from the middle and work outward. Phonetics or speech sounds. Phonology, boy, that was easy for me to say with a sore throat. They're phenomenines, meaning they're phrases that sound a certain way, have certain meanings. Morphology are actually words. Syntax are phrases and sentences. Semantics are the literal meaning of the phrases and sentences. And pragmatics is the meaning and context of our discourse, the whole of it. We learn language early on, right? And it's important that we learn that, because if we don't learn that, we cannot communicate with others. Language acquisition refers to the process which we learn language, right? Understanding how to produce and use words to communicate in any given language group, like English. We know that learning language is not just learning words, and it's affected by many different factors. We have to learn how to connect those words in a proper manner. We have to learn what context those words actually mean in order to be able to use the words in a particular manner that we're trying to get our point across. When we think about language acquisition, it starts early. 2 to 4 months, babies respond to different tones of voice, angry, soothing, or playful. At 6 months, babies associates words like bye-bye with the corresponding behavior. They also begin to babble, which is actually practice as they're working their way to intelligible speech. 8 to 10 months, babies learn that pointing can attract direct attention. They begin to follow adult conversations, shifting eye contact from one speaker to the next. And at 1 year, babies recognize some individual words and people's names. They also start to learn the basic rituals of verbal interaction: question, pause, answer. And they learn greetings. Shortly before or after this time, babies begin to use melodic utterances. It's kind of echoing the variety of pitch and tone that we use in our language. Think about when we question or greet someone or we want something. They learn to mimic that. When we think about language, it's expressive. Verbal communication helps us meet various needs through our ability to express ourselves. In terms of instrumental needs, we use verbal communication to ask questions that provide us specific information. We also use verbal communication to describe things and people and ideas. Verbal communication helps us inform, persuade, and entertain others. As we'll learn later in the book, there are 3 general purposes for public speaking. It's also through these verbal expressions that our personal relationships are formed. At its essence, language is actually expressive. Verbal expressions help us communicate our observations, thoughts, feelings, and needs. Ultimately, verbal expression helps us communicate everything. Expressing observations. So what do I mean by that? Well, when we witness something, right, we can make a report verbally of what we saw. Think about eyewitness testimony. That's a great example of expressing observations, right? Witnesses see something and then they relay it back. We know that observation and description occur in the first step of the perception checking process. We learned that in our last class. When we're trying to make sense of an experience, expressing observation in a descriptive rather than in an evaluative manner can lead to less defensiveness, and that shows that we're actually a good speaker. For those going into the medical field, your ability to make and express observation can help a patient's recovery, or if not caught and expressed, could lead to a patient's death. So communication is important for all jobs. Communication allows us to express thoughts through language, right? When we express thoughts, we draw conclusions based on what we've experienced. In the perception process, this is similar to the interpretation step. We take various observations, we evaluate them and interpret them and assign a meaning, which is basically a conclusion to that thought process. Whereas our observations are generally based on sensory information, what we saw, what we read, what we heard, what we smelled. Thoughts are connected to our beliefs, what we feel is true or false, to our attitudes, what we like and dislike, and to our values, what we think is right, wrong, or good or bad. Jury members are expected to express thoughts based on reported observations during a court case, ultimately judging someone's guilt or innocence as the conclusion, right? The neighbor who saw the car leaving last night, or the night of the crime rather, seemed credible. And then we think, well, the defendant had a shady past. Maybe he's trying to hide something. People will start to express, intentionally or unintentionally, the thoughts they have as feelings. When we express feelings, we communicate our emotions. Expressing feelings is the most difficult part of verbal communication because we have these social norms about how, when, why, where we can, and even to whom we can express our emotions to. Norms for emotional expression also are based on nationality and cultural identities and characteristics such as age and gender. For instance, a kid is going to scream and tell us he's angry with us, versus an adult might try to keep that information in, right? Genderized elements intersect as boys grow older. Young women tend to express feelings better, right? Because we live in a society where we expect women to be more emotionally expressive than men. Men are supposed to not talk about their feelings. Expressing feelings can be difficult, we'll say that, and uncomfortable, right? Especially for the listeners. Some people are just not good at receiving and processing other people's feelings. And even those with good empathetic listening skills can be positively or negatively affected by other people's emotions. We've all been emotionally drained by someone, right? Expressions of anger can be especially difficult to manage because they represent a threat to the face and self-esteem of others, right? It's a conflict. And despite the fact that expressing feelings is more complicated than other forms of expression, emotional sharing is an important part of how we create social bonds and empathize with others. And we must improve it. In order to verbally express our emotions, it's important that we develop an emotional vocabulary. Not curse words, emotional vocabulary. The more specific we can be when we are verbally communicating our emotions, the less ambiguous our emotions will be for the person decoding the message, right? Tell us what we're feeling. Well, we need information to tell what we're feeling. As we expand our emotional vocabulary, we're able to convey the intensity of emotions we're feeling. We can say whether it's mild, moderate, or intense. For example, happy is more mild, delighted is moderate, ecstatic is intense. Ignored is mild, rejected, moderate, abandoned is intense. So picking the right words to describe what we're feeling, it's important. I wanted to talk a little bit about, since mediated communications is becoming a large part of our life, communicating our feelings through mediated communication is inevitable, right? We're going to have to do this. So when we text or email people, or even give someone a card in a time of need, we're conveying feeling. And communicating emotion through written or typed word can have advantages such as the time to compose your thoughts and you're not put on the spot, and you can really express what you're feeling. But there are disadvantages that, in an important context and nonverbal communication, cannot be included. Think about the loss of nonverbal cues and how it's affected in mediated communication. Remember I told you the other day my wife texted me to let me know she was coming back from her dad's. I didn't respond immediately. That could have been a problem, but she knew I was recording these lessons. So that way she didn't feel slighted. That allowed me to put the time and dedication into this course that we need. You guys deserve. And that way I avoided a problem with mediated communication. Again, remember with mediated communication, there is no feedback channel. So we really don't get to know how our message is being received. Sorry if you heard that. That was my dog snoring. I just woke her up. Not the little one. It's the a little bit bigger one. So she'll get a chance to show her face in this class too. Really? That was loud. Okay. I don't know if you can hear it, if your mic's picking it up, but I'm catching it. So if you need nonverbal clues or desperately in need of emotional support, do not choose mediated communication. Choose face-to-face communication because it lacks those things. So when we think about feelings, expressing needs is an important part of it. When we express our needs, we're communicating in an instrumental way to help us get things done, to get needs met. We almost always know our needs better than others do. But it's important for us to get that information out to others. And expressing our needs can help get work done, like a project, or get dinner going. It can help us navigate the changes of a relationship. If we don't express needs, it leads to abandonment, frustration, and or resentment. Language is powerful. Contemporary American philosopher David Abram wrote, only if words are felt, bodily presences like echoes, waterfalls, rainbows, the birds chirping, a dog snoring, Can we understand the power of spoken language to influence, alter, and transform the perceptual world? This statement encapsulates many of the powerful features of language. We will discuss how language expresses our identities, affects our credibility, serves as a means of control, be careful with that one, and performs actions. Remember, if language was not powerful, would poetry exist? And songs would be musical melodies, no lyrics. And here I just threw in a poem, and a song from a band that I used to manage. So, language expresses our identities. The power of language to express our identities, depending on the origin of the label, self-chosen or imposed, and the context. People are usually comfortable with the language they use to describe their own identity, but have issues with labels others might place on them. I'm more than just a professor, right? I'm a father, I'm a husband, a doggy dad who keeps waking up his dog that's snoring. Remember, I talked a little bit about my identity, right? So, right there. I'm from St. Louis. I love the blues. I am actually 1/4 Cherokee. I'm a former journalist. I'm 20% Irish. I'm a dog dad. There's my 2 puppies. That's the one that's snoring, the gray one. I am a professor. I love architecture. Notice the Frank Lloyd Wright's house. And I love the St. Louis Cardinals. Baseball in general, but I'm a Cardinal fan. However, I'm a baseball fan probably more than I'm a Cardinal fan. So I can talk baseball with you if you'd like. I can put those labels on myself, right? But others can't. Or we're at least uncomfortable when they do. Language affects our credibility. One of my goals in this class is to have you look at how you communicate and become more confident with your verbal communication. This includes your vocabulary. Even though we've learned that meaning is in people rather than words, and that rules govern verbal communication, like the rules of grammar, and they are arbitrary, these norms, like vocabulary, mean something. You don't have to be a perfect grammarian to be perceived as credible. Just follow the basic grammar rules for written communication. But then you think, oh, wait, no, if I do that, I'm way too formal, right? It would be... So that's where our spoken word changes a bit. We can't just follow the written word. We use it as a guideline, but we don't want to follow it directly. Remember, I said we'd talk about language as a means of control, and it is. Think about our parents. They were some of the first to do it. If you do that again, and they point at us, right? Oh, man. When we think about control, we always have negative connotations, usually. I mean, that's how our brains work. But technically, it can be positive, neutral, or negative. For instance, if a police officer says stop, and you don't stop, and you run off the road because there was a pothole, and it's now about large enough to consume cars, and you run into that, well, he meant that control as a positive in that moment. Please stop, you're going to wreck your car. Much like language, verbal communication can be used to reward or punish people, right? It can hold positive reinforcement as praise, right? We can use language, verbal communication to criticize people, be aggressive, and that's a form of negative reinforcement. Directives are utterances that try to get another person to do something. That's what I mean by control in this. Would you please pick up your room? Would you please do your homework? They can range from polite asks or requests to more forceful commands, or they can be insistent, like the police officer, stop, right? It is using language as a form of control, but it's not meaning as a negative tool. You know, if we control our language, we can control thought. If we control thought, we can control action. And if we control action, we can control the world. It's been said numerous times, actually. So when we think about communicating, instead of just one person, we can talk to many people so that we can control their decisions. Their thoughts can be altered a bit, perhaps. And I don't mean in mind control or anything like that. But we can come to an agreement with common thought. We can help each other reach real meaning. But to remember that verbal communication can be controlling, deceitful, and vague at times. But ultimately that creates a closed climate. And then people are willing to communicate less, and they definitely will not trust. So, if we try to use and lead with controlling language, and we're having a lot of that right now, from upper levels of politics, we can't force people to change their mind. We cannot force them to see it our way. We can try to convince them, try to persuade them. But when people feel like they're being forced, they're less willing to communicate, and they're definitely not going to trust you. Language is performative. Some language is kind of a guarantee or an action packet of information, right? I promise, I guarantee, I pledge, I'll clean my room, Mom. It does more, those performative moments does more than just convey basic meaning. It communicates intent. Those are called commissives. Commissives are promises that you'll tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in court. Just remember this. Unfortunately, promises can and will be broken by many. I'm not saying all the time, but it happens. Language is fun. Writers, poets, comedians have built careers on their ability to have fun with language and in turn share that fun with others. The fun and frivolity of language becomes clear as teachers get half-hearted laughs from students when they make puns. Humor is a complicated social phenomenon, and it's largely based on the relationship between language and meaning. Humor functions to liven up conversations, break the ice, increase group cohesion. We use humor to test our compatibility with others, and we use humor to avoid deep conversations sometimes, right? Language is dynamic. Language is limitless. We create a one-of-a-kind sentence combining words in new ways, and we don't even realize it. Aside from endless structural possibilities, words tend to change meaning over time, and new words are created daily. We're going to talk about that. We're going to focus on neologisms and slang. Neologisms are newly coined or newly used words. Doom scrolling, bingeability, skimmability, bed rotting, vibe coding. Those are some newer words we've created, right? English is the vacuum cleaner of all languages, and honestly, English speakers tend to be the best at this. Slang is new or adapted words that are specific to a group, a context, or a time period, regardless as they're kind of regarded as less formal. They're also representative of people's creative willingness to play with language. All right, so slang. We use verbal communicate to communication to initiate, maintain, and terminate our interpersonal relationships. I've said that several times. And what I mean by that is simply that language will either bring us together or it will bring us apart. Think about it. We build relationships, we nurture those relationships, or we let those relationships die. And one of the big things is frequency of communication. So verbal communication is key to bringing people together and maintaining relationships. Language can separate us. When we think about criticism, teasing, or even language differences, the difference between languages, like English and French, verbal communication can lead to feelings of separation. If you don't believe me, travel to Cuba and don't know Spanish. You'll be struggling to understand what's going on around you. You won't get the best experience. So there we have a situation where language, because one language is spoken and the other one isn't so much, can lead to a feeling of separation. At the interpersonal level, unsupported messages can make people respond in a defensive manner. That leads to feelings of separation or the dissolution of a relationship. It's impossible to be supportive in our communication all the time. But constantly or consistently unsupported messages can hurt somebody's self-esteem, which in turn creates conflict, leads to more defensiveness, and ultimately can cause a partnership, a relationship to become toxic, right? There are 6 verbal tactics that can lead to defensiveness and separation. Global labels, sarcasm, I hate that because I'm good at it, dragging up the past, negative comparison, and judgmental you messages as well as threats. So make sure when we're communicating, we're not doing that. Unless that's what we need to do. A lot of emphasis on this. I'm going to hit it again. We need to make sure we use our words clearly. Sorry about my voice going in and out. And I mispronounced a couple words that I even know. And I'm like, oh my gosh. But I am on medicine, so I'm trying to make sure that we've got these lessons going so that we're not behind. When we think about using our words clearly, we choose our words depending on who we're talking to, right? And the situation, as well as our motives and intentions. We make a deliberate effort to speak as clearly as possible many times. Sometimes we'll slow our rate down, we'll increase our volume, or we'll use certain words like frankly, let me be clear. But sometimes, especially when emotion is involved, it's difficult to speak clearly. Or if we're speaking about something that we're unfamiliar with, right? Emotions and distractions definitely interfere with our clarity, right? Also, if we don't know something well, how can we be expected to be clear and understand it? Be aware of the varying levels of abstraction within language, because choosing our words sometimes can make a difference between clarity and someone getting the whole message. And I'm going to show you on an abstraction chart when we talk about concrete things to abstract things. So on the left, you see a picture of an animal. It is a cow, right? That is a very concrete thing. So if we call that cow's name is Bessie, that's a little bit less concrete. It's a little more abstract. It's a symbol or a thing that allows us to know about that cow, Bessie. Cow is, again, the word that symbolizes bovine creatures. we think about livestock, that's multiples of cows, right? Kept on a farm, which become assets. They're worth money, right? And then money is a symbol of wealth. Now, if I said, I have a plan to make you wealthy and don't tell you that we're going to be buying a bunch of cows, you'll have no idea how we're going to get wealthy, right? It's vague, it's unclear, it's not real. And secondly, you might not have a yard big enough for cows. I don't. I live in downtown Gainesville, an old historic section of Gainesville. My yard is, well, I went from having 3.5 acres in East Denali to moving to downtown Gainesville, and I think our whole lot is 0.75 acres. So not a lot of room. Might be able to support one cow as long as I feed it other feed, right? So again, cow, passé, livestock, wealth. We want to be clear, so let's not be vague. Knowing more about the role of abstraction plays in the generation of meaning can help us better describe and define words that we are using. As we learned earlier, denotative definitions are found in the dictionary, officially agreed upon definitions roughly. Since definitions are composed of words, people who compile dictionaries take for granted that there's a certain amount of familiarity with those words that they're using to define another word. Otherwise, we're just going in circles. Sometimes a challenge we face in defining words is our tendency to go up the ladder of abstraction rather than go down. If I say the word blue, you're going to say color, right? If I ask you what a color is, you tell me, well, it's a tint or characteristic in the appearance of something, right? To define more clearly, by going down the ladder of abstraction, you could say, it's the color of Frank Sinatra's eyes, or it's the color of a sky on a clear day. People often come to understanding more quickly when a definition is descriptive and or ties into their personal experiences. You notice a lot of personal experience I try to tie in stories so that you understand what it is we're talking about. When we're talking about creating whole messages, we learn that the 4 types of expression, which are observation, thoughts, feelings, and needs, right? 4 expressions: observation, thoughts, feelings, needs. Whole messages include all the relevant types of expressions needed to most effectively communicate in any given situation. It's going to talk about what you see, think, feel, and need. If you cover the bases, people will more than likely understand. Partial messages lack relevant expressions needed to clearly communicate, and contaminated messages include mixed or misleading expressions. For example, Alyssa says to her college-age daughter, "It looks like you've wasted another semester." We don't really know what's going on, right? It's a contaminated message. It's contaminated by our observations, feelings, and thoughts, but we don't know the particulars on why Alyssa told her daughter that you wasted another year. Affective language refers to language used to express a person's feelings and create similar feelings within another person. Affective language can be intentionally used in relational context to create or enhance interpersonal bonds. It can also effectively be employed in particular public speaking engagements to really grab your audience and motivate them in particular ways. We're going to learn more about that in future segments. But just remember, effective language spontaneously and less intentionally is scripted. It's more of a speak from the heart type. Because again, feelings are involved. Figurative language. When someone says there's a figure of speech, they're referring to a word or phrase that deviates from the expectations in some way in meaning or usage. Figurative language is a result of breaking semantic rules, but in a way that typically enhances meaning or understanding rather than diminishes it. When we think about, we've got similes and metaphors. So a simile is a direct comparison of two things using words like or as. Similes can be explicit for the purpose of conveying a specific meaning and increase clarity and lead people to personally connect to a meaning. She was as loud as a horn. He's as busy as a bee, right? He was as brave as a lion. They're happy as clams. We use phrases like that to help people understand. Whereas a metaphor is an implicit comparison of two things that are not alike and not typically associated. They become meaningful as people realize the speaker's purpose for relating the two seemingly disseparate ideas. Metaphors are figurative devices that can make our writing and speaking richer, but they require a person to balance creative associations along with ideas with the common rules of language if the people are expected to figure out the meaning behind the association. Life is a journey. She's got a heart of gold, right? Love is a battlefield. Time is money. Those are all metaphors. And we know pretty much what they mean, right? We learn them over time because we can see the correlation, even though they're not directly related. Evocative language. Evocative language captures people's attention and their imagination because it conveys emotion and action. It can tell you a story, right? Think about the array of mental images that a poem or well-told story from a friend can conjure up. Evocative language can also lead us to have similar physical reactions. As a speaker, there may be times when evoking a positive or negative reaction could be beneficial. Evoking a sense of calm as you talk to your friend through troubling health news, right? Evoking a sense of agitation could help you motivate an audience towards action. But be careful. Some words are so evocative that their usage violates the social norms of appropriate conversations. Even though we could use those words intentionally to shock people, we choose to use euphemisms or less evocative synonyms for indirect references to words or ideas that are deemed inappropriate to discuss directly. We have many euphemisms for things like excretory acts, sexual relations, and even death. We do that to try to shield our audience, right? That's part of using words ethically. In the way we talk, we choose our words, and the actions we take after we're done speaking, all into account, because ultimately they reflect on us. And that's the beauty of communication ethics. We learn that language is performative. It can, and the meaning can exceed the exchange of information and actually perform certain actions. Knowing language can have real effects on people increases our need to be aware of the ethical implications of what we say. Our strong emotions, our own beliefs, regarding our own beliefs, our attitudes, our values, can sometimes lead to incivility in our verbal communication. Incivility occurs when a person deviates from established social norms, and it honestly can take many forms like insults, bragging, bullying, gossiping, swearing, deception, defensiveness, amongst others. Some journalists and media commentators, as well as scholars, have argued that flaming happens on comment sections of websites and blogs, and that's a type of verbal incivility, and it poses a potential threat to democracy. Other scholars of communication and democracy have not labeled those type of communications as uncivil. So here we are. We can't even get a solid within the field and study of communication, But what we can do is say, hey, flaming online, being mean indiscriminately to people online, it's not okay. It's not right. It's not ethical. When we use language ethically, we have to take into account several things. Individual differences. Some people differ in their interpretations of civility in various settings. Some people have personality traits that may lead people to do things that most of us would deem uncivil, right? That's maybe why they're doing it. Maybe they're just ignorant. Sometimes they're socially not educated in a way, so they rant and rave online, right? Sometimes it's a lack of skill. Many of us know how to behave, but sometimes we can't do it, right? And sometimes those frustrations lead to a person to engage in undesirable behavior like personal attacks or slamming people online, right? Sometimes it's a lapse of control. Sometimes people who do know how to behave sometimes just react inappropriately, right? And then negative intent. Sometimes people are doing it purposefully. They're trying to break with conformity, challenge societal norms, or self-benefit. Sometimes people will be mean because they feel like it's cool to be mean. And that's not okay. Usually those people need some help. We can use language to motivate people and get people behind us. Philosophers of language have long noted our tendency to verbally represent the world in very narrow ways, especially when we're threatened. This misrepresentation of reality, and it honestly closes off dialogue. Although in our everyday talk, we describe things in nuanced and measured ways, quarrels and controversies narrow our vision, and it's reflected in our vocabulary in those moments, right? In order to maintain civil discourse in which people interact ethically and competently, it's been suggested that we keep an open mind and an even more open vocabulary. One feature of communicative incivility is polarizing language. It refers to language that presents people, ideas, or situations as polar opposites. It's that idea of black and white, good and evil, right? It really exaggerates differences and overgeneralizes the whole. Being able to see only two values is completely closed-minded, and it doesn't make you seem sophisticated or seem like you have critical thinking skills. We don't have to accept every viewpoint as right and valid, but we can still hold strongly to our beliefs, defend our beliefs, but not ignore other possibilities of other truths or other rights or areas of gray. Because ultimately, when we stick to our guns and use polarizing language, we alienate people. My Facebook friends group has drastically diminished. It was by my choice. If people couldn't be tolerant either side of the political spectrum, by the way, I sit pretty much dead away in the middle. Just so you know. I'm not a blind follower of any political group. I vote for what's best in the masses' best interest, not my own best interest. So, that said, I'm very moderate. I'm probably a Kennedy Democrat, but a Kennedy Democrat now is almost a non-existent thing. It's called a moderate Republican. And in this current climate, there doesn't seem to be any of those. But I refuse to drink the Kool-Aid from either party. And I try to look at everything as shades of gray and shades of color. We cannot ultimately say right and wrong, good and evil, right? There are times, I suppose, that comes into play. But when it comes to politics, it's very rare. That said, my friends list has diminished greatly because if they were too loud and banging the drums and not courteous to others, I eliminated them from my list. This includes family members, friends from high school, friends from college, workplace friends, you name it. I made those choices because I didn't want to see the rhetoric that people were spouting. Keyword rhetoric. It's not really what's going to happen. It's just what people are saying could happen. And yeah, they could be right, but most of the time they're not, and that's why it's called rhetoric. I made the choice to be more inclusive, avoid polarizing language, and just really try to be a good person and try to understand everyone's point of view because everyone has legitimate points of view. And I said something about this last class, I think, but I'm going to say it again. Swearing. Scholars have identified two types of swearing. There's social swearing and annoyance swearing. People who engage in social swearing create social bonds for the management of impressions, right? To seem cool, attractive, hip. This type of swearing typically is male dominated, but lately not so much. There's generally more of a social taboo against women swearing than men, but again, communication is contextual, right? Annoyance swearing is a sense of relief. People use it to manage stress and tension. It's a preferred alternative to physical aggression, right? In some cases, swearing can be cathartic, allowing a person to release emotions that might lead them to be aggressive or perform violent language. But my advice is, in public speaking, when you're trying to impress people, probably try cutting back on swearing. Use descriptive language to express yourself. Even if you're frustrated, it's going to go over better. Accountability. We live in a time where accountability is at an all-time low. I came from journalism when journalists, we had to speak the truth. Nowadays, I don't know if anybody speaks the truth, and it's sad. I'm voting for more accountability. I propose more accountability in my life and in others' lives. And the reason I do that is because as a speaker, as a person who's a professional, I realize that I have to be accountable for the things I say, the words I use. The complexity of our verbal language system allows us to present inferences as fact and mask judgments within seemingly objective or oblique language. What that means is we can subterfuge, we can hide meaning. We can pretend to be telling the truth, but in reality, it's our bias, our opinions, our inferences, our judgments, not truth. Inferences are conclusion-based, and they're thoughts or speculations, but not direct observation. Facts are conclusions based on direct observation and or group's consensus. Judgments are expressions of approval or disapproval that are subjective and unverifiable. Please deal with facts. Express your judgments and inferences as that. They are just subjective. They are not verifiable, and they are not the truth. Be truthful, be accountable, and that way, that will follow you. You will be known as that person. Chapter 3 homework, it's going to be listed out there again. I want you to take a common word and run it through the ladder of abstraction. Write its meaning down for each level, step by step, from concrete to most abstract. And I want you to discuss how the meaning changes as the word or idea becomes more abstract and how the word becomes more difficult to define. That's it for chapter 3. Thanks so much.